and welcome to this special Procurement Act podcast mini-series brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. This series is supported by Procurement Hub. Welcome to our third episode of this CIPS Futures Procurement Act mini-series, partnered with Procurement Hub, part of Places for People. So we've covered the context of the Act, and in episode 2 we explored the impact of transparency, and next up we're going to explore the topic of professionalism and integrity. We're once again joined by Alan Heron, Director for Procurement at Places for People, and Rebecca Rees, Partner and Head of Public Procurement at international law firm Trowers and Hamlins. Welcome both. Thanks very much for joining us again. Let's dive straight into this one, shall we? Alan, why do you think it was important for the Procurement Act to address the concept of professionalism in public sector procurement?
The public sector is probably under more strain than it ever has been before. A perfect storm of limited budgets and ever-increasing demand for public services mean that every single penny of those budgets is incredibly important. Ensuring that public sector procurement is undertaken professionally with integrity and transparency is therefore critical. It's important to recognise that this professionalism and integrity is required not only of the contracting authorities in the public sector, but also of the supply chain that they work with and the framework providers that they might use to supplement their requirements. There were some very well-known examples of poor public sector procurement of PPE during COVID, which is quite rightly heightened scrutiny on value for money achieved within the public sector. I don't think of the public sector procurement in terms of pounds and pence or contracts or pricing spreadsheets, but rather in terms of desks in schools, beds in hospitals, or roofs over the heads of vulnerable people in most need of our help. And I think that's why we must strive to be as professional, ethical and transparent as possible, and only work with those organisations that share those values with us.
Rebecca, is there a specific section of the Act that addresses this, or has the concept of improving professionalism and integrity been more interwoven throughout the Act? Can you give us some kind of key areas where you think this is being done?
Yes, thanks, Emma. There is a specific provision in that Section 12 overriding procurement objectives includes the objectives of procurement officers acting and being seen to act with integrity. That's supported by the National Procurement Policy Statement currently, and we see it coming forward, hopefully under the new Labour government, under a new NPPS, as talking around improving capacity and capability in the procurement sector in terms of one of the national policies as well. And then very practically, it's underpinned in the latter sections of the Procurement Act, sections 81 to 83, that deal with conflicts of interest. What is a conflict of interest, and what do you do to identify, ameliorate and manage those conflicts of interest in a procurement? So there is a lot that's in there explicitly. And I think that really in terms of the Cabinet Office's approach to procurement reform, they recognise that professionalism, integrity, all are an essential characteristic of a good procurement officer. And therefore, when people go through their e-learning, deep dives, all of the guidance, you can see that massive attention to learning and development by the Cabinet Office in this go live period is to ensure that people are upskilled, because actually the flexibilities and the benefits of procurement reform won't be taken into account and maximised unless you have a professional, upskilled sector with which to take it forward.
And the Act will enable procurement professionals to flex more commercial skills and give more flexibility. And some of those skills they haven't perhaps honed so much recently because it hasn't been available for them to use. So I guess that building that capability and upskilling or fine-tuning skills that are there perhaps but haven't been used for a while is key to what they're trying to achieve. Rebecca, we know the disbarment list is something new the Act introduces. Can you explain what this is about? What do both procurement practitioners and suppliers need to know about this?
Yes, Emma. Okay, so debarment list. I mean, I describe it as the Procurement Act's naughty step. It's a centrally managed and controlled list of underperforming or dodgy bidders. And if you're on that list as a bidder, you can be excluded from all public sector procurement for up to 3 or 5 years, depending on what the debarment reason is. Why is it there? We've always had mandatory and discretionary exclusion grounds. But in having them, it does rely on individual contracting authorities who could essentially be small district councils or smaller charities, undertaking the role of the Competition and Markets Authority to check whether, some of these exclusion grounds applies. So what that list is attempting to do is take those difficult decisions out of the hands of individual contracting authorities to make their life easier at that stage. I think what I would say is that Cabinet Office have a real challenge on their hands because they've created this naughty step, this debarment list. And in some sense, they've now got to use it. But the corollary of that is that we are talking about competition here. We're talking about competitive environments. And therefore, the need to leave some bidders in the room will mean that the Cabinet Office have a very difficult set of decisions to make when using the debarment list in public sector procurement life as to who they place on that list. And who they investigate and decide not to place on that list. Because obviously it has to be transparent. It will have to treat bidders equally. But again, we need to leave people in the room to ensure that the numbers are such that there is a competitive environment. So again, it's one of those quite unpopular moral kind of issues there. They will need to make a decision as to when bidders have been too dodgy, that they need to be publicly chastised and prevented from gaining further access to the public sector purse.
Yeah, I think it's one that time will tell how easy that is to do and how that one will work. Alan, how do the growing amount of frameworks from both public and private sector bodies relate to this? Do they make it easier or more challenging for contracting authorities to procure with confidence in the integrity of suppliers?
It's a really good question, Emma. Personally, I think there are some dangerous, dishonest and greedy behaviours from some of the framework providers out there that jeopardise the much needed public sector budgets that we have. There are some unscrupulous framework providers charging fees in excess of 10% without publishing or declaring them. And they operate their businesses like Victorian parlour games of misdirection and greed, treating the public sector simply as a cash cow. There's also a very important question of private sector framework providers and their liability. They're not bound by the Procurement Act, nor are they subject to it in any way. They therefore have no liability. Additionally, they're not contracting authorities and therefore they're not legally allowed to create frameworks. For this, they rely on tame or unsuspecting contracting authorities who do this on their behalf. But again, where does the liability lie? This complex and often hidden structure, along with high fees and misinformation, make this a very real problem for the public sector. I would strongly urge all public sector bodies consider using a framework provider to do their homework. Who is the contracting authority behind the framework provider? What are their fees? Do the fees go back into the public sector? Where's the liability? There might be a ray of light in the register of commercial tools which the government is about to create. This is a platform where all framework providers must register their frameworks to be used by the public sector. And there's a strong desire that this register will mandate framework providers to publish their fees openly and state who the contracting authority is, what the relationship between them is, and what the fees are used for. And from my perspective, I think that would be a very positive step for us all.
Thanks, Alan. Rebecca, what's your advice for those leading procurement teams to ensure their teams consider the new regime in this area?
Thanks, Emma. I mean, I agree with everything Alan's just said. The proliferation of frameworks in the public sector, it probably increases cost for procurement exponentially. With contracting authorities being encouraged or certainly enabled to spot purchase regardless of cost. What I would say just quickly is the NAO has issued a report on efficiency in government on the procurement of common goods and services, which picks up this framework agreement point. And there is the gold standard for public sector construction framework agreements to consider as well. So for procurement teams, as Alan said, you've really got to do your homework. We know that often contracts fall through the net and clients come up to you last minute and say, I need to be in contract on Monday. But using framework agreements to procure those last minute contracts does bring with it additional cost in terms of fees, both hidden and declared, and is often a very expensive way to provide a rather meagre fig leaf of compliance. I think procurement teams need to have a long-term thought out strategy to which framework agreements it's going to use. Do have a look at all of those elements that Alan has said. Are they a public sector framework provider, or are you helping line the pockets of the local Ferrari garage in spending money with a private sector provider? Does it cover your requirement fully, and can you link it back to a value for money award made at the point the framework was let or via a mini competition? So there's lots to do. I don't think using a framework agreement should negate any need to consider procurement and the appropriateness of that framework agreement for the procurement need and outcome, any less than you would with an open tender.
Excellent. Thanks, Rebecca. Alan, I guess for people listening in now, what advice would you give to them for prepare for this element of the Act?
Well, I think that the Act itself is probably going to drive a lot more volume towards framework providers, probably because the contracting authorities will be faced with an increased capacity constraints because of the new obligations under the Act. And also, a lot of the organisations won't have perhaps the familiarity and understanding of the Act that they want from day one. So there will be a reliance on framework providers that are out there in the sector. And there are many good framework providers out there in the sector, but equally, like all walks of life, there are some that are not very good. So I think it's absolutely imperative that if you are planning to use a framework provider, just as Rebecca and I have said before, do your homework. Just do a little bit of digging, ask a couple of questions, and it will give you the ability to make informed choices. And I think that's the best position to be in.
Sound advice again. Thanks, Alan. Thanks both. Lots of really useful insight there, and hopefully the new regime will encourage both contracting authorities and suppliers to embed more integrity into their procurement processes. So that's 3 out of 4 episodes wrapped up from our mini-series. The final episode will explore the opportunities the Act provides to open up public sector procurement. So do join us for that. Thank you to the Procurement Hub for supporting the CIPS Futures series. Part of Places for People, Procurement Hub are a commercially sensitive procurement consortium with giving back and social purpose at their forefront. This podcast has been brought to you by CIPS, the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. For more information on CIPS, head over to cips.org, where you can find out about our up-and-coming events and excellent training opportunities on offer. See you next time.